The boardroom fell silent for exactly 3 seconds before the laughter started. It wasn't quiet chuckling or polite coughing. It was real loud laughter that bounced off the glass walls and echoed in my chest. My project proposal sat on the screen behind me, red circles marking every section someone had torn apart. I watched my supervisor, Marcus, lean back in his leather chair with his arms crossed. He didn't tell them to stop. He didn't defend the months I'd spent researching and planning. He just watched me stand there frozen, while 12 executives laughed at my work like it was a comedy show. My hands gripped the presentation clicker so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood perfectly still and let them finish. When the room finally quieted, Marcus cleared his throat and said the words that would haunt me for months. Maybe next time we'll give this kind of project to someone more experienced. My name is David Torres, and that morning changed everything. I'd worked at Westfield Analytics for 3 years. 3 years of staying late, arriving early, and volunteering for every difficult assignment nobody else wanted. I thought hard work mattered. I thought results spoke for themselves. But standing in that boardroom, watching my career crumble while people smirked behind their coffee cups, I realized something painful. They weren't laughing at my proposal. They were laughing at me, the quiet guy from the corner desk who never pushed back, the one who did good work but never made noise about it. I'd become invisible, and invisible people don't get respect. They get blamed. As I packed up my laptop and notes, my hands were shaking. Not from anger yet, from shock. From the sudden understanding that I'd spent 3 years building a career on sand and someone had just kicked the foundation out from under me. What made it worse was that I'd been right. 6 weeks before that meeting, I'd sent detailed emails to Marcus about potential risks in our current client strategy. I'd outlined problems with our data collection methods. I'd even suggested solutions that could save the company thousands of dollars. Marcus had replied with a quick, "Thanks, we'll review," and never mentioned it again. But when those exact problems surfaced during a major client audit, suddenly everyone needed someone to blame. My emails disappeared from the conversation. My warnings were forgotten. Instead, Marcus held that meeting and put my name next to the word oversight on a presentation slide. He never mentioned that I'd flagged the issues. He never said I'd tried to prevent this. He just needed a face to attach to the failure. And mine was convenient, too junior to fight back, too quiet to cause problems. After the meeting ended, I walked back to my desk through a maze of cubicles. People who usually smiled and said good morning suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. My work friend Amanda gave me a sympathetic look but didn't say anything. The silence felt heavier than the laughter. Within an hour, I noticed something strange happening in my inbox. Meeting invitations were disappearing. A project team I'd been part of for 8 months suddenly had a calendar update. My name was removed. No explanation, no email, just gone. I wasn't fired, which almost made it worse. If they'd fired me, at least it would have been clean. Instead, they kept me around like a ghost, still employed but completely erased from anything that mattered. I was being slowly squeezed out, suffocated by silence and exclusion. My desk phone didn't ring anymore. My ideas in meetings were met with polite nods and immediate topic changes. 2 days later, I passed Marcus in the hallway near the elevators. He was talking on his phone, laughing about something. When he saw me, he ended the call and gave me this tight, corporate smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, David. Tough break in there the other day." His hand landed on my shoulder for barely a second before pulling away, like touching me too long might transfer my failure onto him. "These things happen. You'll bounce back." Then he turned and walked toward the executive offices, already forgetting I existed. I stood there watching him go, and something inside me cracked. Not broke. Cracked. Like ice on a lake that looks solid but has fractures running underneath. That casual dismissal, that fake sympathy, that complete lack of accountability for throwing me under the bus. It lit something in me. Not rage, something colder, clarity. I wasn't going to bounce back. I was going to rebuild completely. The next few weeks were brutal. My annual review got postponed twice, then rescheduled with a junior HR coordinator instead of Marcus. That told me everything. When it finally happened, I sat across from this nervous 24-year-old who could barely make eye contact while she explained that my bonus was being redistributed due to project outcomes. The promotion I'd been promised 6 months ago went to Kyle, a guy who'd joined the company 8 months after me and spent most of his time in Marcus's office talking about golf. Kyle couldn't explain our client retention strategy if his life depended on it, but he was loud and confident and looked good in meetings. I started waking up at 3 a.m, staring at my ceiling, replaying every conversation and every decision. I kept asking myself how competence had become a weakness, how doing good work quietly had turned me into a target instead of an asset. I didn't quit. Everyone expected me to quit. Amanda even asked me one afternoon why I was still there, and I didn't have a good answer. Except I did, quietly forming in the back of my mind. I wasn't going to run away angry and defeated. I was going to leave on my terms when I was ready, with something they couldn't take from me. So I started doing something different. I began documenting everything, every process, every decision, every outcome. I created detailed records of how projects actually worked, not how Marcus presented them in meetings. I tracked which strategies succeeded and which ones failed. I stopped trying to get noticed in meetings and started building something more valuable. Proof. Undeniable, detailed proof of what I knew and what I could do. I worked, quietly, even more quietly than before, but with a different purpose. I wasn't trying to please anyone anymore. I was preparing. While I worked, I watched. I started noticing patterns I'd been too busy to see before. Marcus took credit for ideas that came from team meetings, never mentioning who actually suggested them. He skipped crucial steps in client analysis because they took too long, then acted surprised when problems appeared later. He ignored warnings from people who actually understood the data, preferring simple answers that sounded good to executives. I watched Kyle get praised for a presentation I'd helped him build, never receiving even a mention. I saw projects fail because of shortcuts Marcus had insisted on, only to watch him blame the team members instead of the strategy. And I realized something important. My former manager was good at looking successful. He wasn't good at actually being successful. The difference would matter eventually. I just needed to be patient and keep building my foundation while his crumbled underneath him. I resigned on a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 7 months after the boardroom disaster. I'd already accepted another position at a smaller consulting firm called Bridgeway Solutions. Less prestigious, definitely less pay. But the hiring manager, Victoria, had actually read my work samples and asked intelligent questions about my analytical methods. When I handed Marcus my resignation letter, he barely looked up from his computer. "Oh, okay, 2 weeks." I nodded. He typed something, clicked his mouse, and said, "We'll send out an announcement. Good luck with everything." No counteroffer, no questions about why I was leaving or where I was going, no exit interview to understand what went wrong. Just a corporate email 2 hours later announcing my departure to pursue other opportunities, walking out of that about why I was leaving or where I was going, no exit interview to understand what went wrong. Just a corporate email 2 hours later announcing my departure to pursue other opportunities, walking out of that building on my last day carrying a small box with my desk plant and a coffee mug. I felt dizzy. But it wasn't fear. It was freedom. Bridgeway Solutions occupied 2 floors of a converted warehouse building downtown. My new desk faced a window instead of a wall. The team was smaller, younger, hungrier. On my first day, Victoria dropped a thick folder on my desk and said, "Clients a mess. Previous consultant couldn't figure out their supply chain issues. You have 3 weeks. No hand-holding. No elaborate onboarding, just work." I stayed late every night that first month, learning their systems, mapping their processes, asking questions that made people uncomfortable. I didn't talk about Westfield. I didn't mention Marcus or the boardroom or any of it. I let my work speak, but this time I made sure it spoke clearly. I presented findings in simple language. I showed connections between problems nobody else had noticed. I didn't just identify issues, I brought solutions that actually worked in the real world, not just in theory. Slowly, people started listening differently when I talked. 6 months into my time at Bridgeway, Victoria called me into her office on a Friday afternoon. I thought I was in trouble. Instead, she offered me lead analyst on a major project with a retail client that was hemorrhaging money. The scope was massive, analysing 3 years of sales data, inventory management, and customer behaviour across 47 locations. I looked at the project brief and felt my hands start shaking. Not from fear, from recognition. This was exactly what I'd been preparing for. All those late nights documenting processes, all those patterns I'd learned to spot, all that quiet work nobody had appreciated. It had been building towards something. I took the project. I assembled a small team, and I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life. But this time, it felt different. I wasn't working to be seen. I wasn't working to please a manager who'd already decided I didn't matter. I was working because I finally could. The project took 4 months. We found problems in places the client never thought to look. Inventory systems that fought against each other, pricing strategies that made no sense across different regions, store managers who'd been given conflicting directions for years. We didn't just write a report, we created an implementation plan that the client could actually use. When we presented our findings, the client's CEO stood up and shook my hand. "This is the clearest analysis we've ever received," she said. "You've probably saved us millions." The project succeeded quietly but completely. Revenue improved, costs dropped. Within 2 months, that retail client was referring us to other companies. My name started appearing in conversations I wasn't part of. Victoria told me that clients were specifically requesting me for their projects. And this time, when people mentioned my work, nobody laughed. They leaned forward and took notes. I was pulling data for a new project when my phone rang with an unknown number. Usually, I ignored those, but something made me answer. It was a recruiter from a national firm, asking if I'd be interested in discussing opportunities. I politely declined. Then another recruiter called 2 days later. Then another. I started asking how they'd gotten my name. The answers were always similar. Someone had recommended me. They'd heard about my work. My analysis methods were getting attention in the industry. Then one recruiter mentioned something that made me pause. "I hear Westfield Analytics has been struggling lately. Missed targets, failed client launches. You dodged a bullet getting out of there." I thanked her and ended the call, but my mind was racing. I pulled up Westfield's public information and industry news. She was right. Their quarterly reports showed declining revenue, client retention was down, and several executives had left in the past 4 months. Victoria promoted me to senior analyst on a quiet Wednesday morning. Bigger team, bigger projects, bigger influence. When I signed the paperwork, my hands were completely steady. I'd earned this without destroying anyone, without politics or manipulation or throwing people under the bus. Just work. Real, solid, undeniable work. My salary was now higher than what I'd been making at Westfield. My team actually respected me. Clients asked for me by name. I thought about that boardroom 7 months ago, about Marcus's dismissive shoulder pat, about Kyle's unearned promotion. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not vindication. Just distance. They'd become part of my past, and my past was getting smaller in the rearview mirror. I was too busy building my future to spend energy on their collapse, but the universe wasn't done showing me exactly how far I'd come. CADSE, the National Analytics Conference, happened every April in Chicago. I'd attended twice before as a quiet observer in cheap seats, taking notes while famous consultants spoke on stage. This year, Victoria told me Bridgeway had been asked to provide a featured speaker for a panel on innovative data strategies. "I want you to do it," she said. "Your retail project is exactly what they're looking for." I agreed, not thinking much about who else might attend. The conference had thousands of people. The chances of seeing anyone from my old life seemed small. But when I walked onto that stage under bright lights, adjusting my microphone while the moderator introduced me, I looked out at the audience. And there, frozen in the fifth row with a conference program half raised, was Marcus. Our eyes met for 1 second before I looked away and began my presentation. Marcus tried to smile when I glanced his direction again. I didn't return it. I'd spent too long learning not to perform for people who didn't deserve it. Instead, I spoke calmly and clearly about the methodology we'd developed. I explained how traditional approaches missed critical connections in complex datasets. I walked through our retail project without naming the client, showing how we'd increased their profit margin by 18% in 6 months. The audience was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than that boardroom. This was focus, attention, respect. People were typing notes into their laptops. Phones were recording. Someone in the front row was nodding along like I was confirming something they'd suspected but couldn't prove. I'd prepared a 30-minute presentation. I spoke for 25 minutes, then opened it up for questions. 15 hands shot up immediately. The questions went deep into technical methods and practical applications. I answered each one thoroughly, enjoying the intellectual challenge. Then someone near the back asked, "You mentioned earlier that some traditional corporate structures resist this kind of analysis. Why do you think that is?" I paused, just long enough to gather my thoughts, very aware of Marcus sitting there listening. "Because this kind of work reveals uncomfortable truths," I said. "It shows when leadership has been taking shortcuts or ignoring warnings. Many organizations prefer simple stories to complex realities. And when problems surface, it's easier to blame individuals than to examine systemic failures." I kept my voice level, factual, professional. Failure is often a leadership problem, not a talent one. The room went completely silent. A few people glanced at each other. Someone wrote that quote down word for word, and Marcus's face went carefully blank. I didn't see Marcus after the conference, and I didn't seek him out. I flew home, returned to work, and forgot about it. But apparently, the industry didn't forget. My presentation got mentioned in several analytics blogs. Someone posted clips on professional social media. A podcast interviewed me about our retail methodology. And while I was building momentum in my new life, Westfield was quietly falling apart in my old one. Amanda reached out 3 months after the conference. We met for coffee, and she told me everything. Internal audits had started after 2 major clients left and filed complaints about mismanaged projects. The audits revealed patterns of poor decision-making, ignored warnings, and accountability failures. Several projects I'd worked on were being re-examined, and my old emails were surfacing, the ones where I'd flagged risks that were later ignored. Marcus's name kept appearing in the reports, always on the wrong side of the decisions. Within 6 months of that conference, executives at Westfield started leaving. The CFO resigned first, citing strategic differences, then the VP of Client Relations, then others. Amanda said the company was hemorrhaging talent and clients simultaneously. People who'd stayed quiet for years were finally speaking up about the toxic culture, the shortcuts, the scapegoating. Marcus's name appeared repeatedly in exit interviews and internal reviews. His charm couldn't smooth over documented failures anymore. No amount of golf conversations or confident presentations could hide the pattern of projects collapsing under his supervision. The protection he'd enjoyed from senior leadership evaporated when the company's revenue dropped and board members started asking hard questions. Amanda told me he'd been put on a performance improvement plan, which everyone knew was corporate code for, "We're building a case to fire you." Marcus was let go on a Thursday in September. No announcement, no farewell party, no company-wide email thanking him for his years of service. He was just gone. Amanda sent me a text. "Marcus is out. They escorted him out this morning." Very quiet. I read it sitting at my desk at Bridgeway, surrounded by my team working on 3 major projects. I thought about how I'd been erased from meetings and projects after that boardroom disaster, how I'd walked through silent cubicles while people avoided eye contact, how casual and dismissive everyone had been about destroying my reputation. Now Marcus had experienced the same quiet deletion, but this version was deserved, built on actual failures instead of convenient scapegoating. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't call anyone to celebrate. I just noted it mentally and went back to work. His ending wasn't my victory. My new beginning was. 2 months after Marcus left, Bridgeway acquired a major consulting contract with a manufacturing company. Victoria called me into her office to discuss it, and when she told me the details, I recognized the name immediately. It was one of Westfield's oldest clients, worth millions annually. They'd left Westfield after a failed logistics project and were looking for a firm that could fix the mess. "I want you leading this," Victoria said. "It's complicated, and they're frustrated. They need someone who can understand what went wrong and make it right." I accepted without mentioning my history. It didn't matter where the client came from. What mattered was the work. I assembled my team, reviewed Westfield's previous analysis, and found exactly what I expected. Surface-level conclusions, ignored warning signs, and recommendations that sounded good but wouldn't work in practice. We started over from scratch. The manufacturing project took 8 months and became one of our firm's biggest successes. We restructured their entire logistics system, saved them 40% on shipping costs, and improved delivery times across all regions. When we presented the final results, their board of directors gave us a standing ovation. Then the awards started coming. First internal, Bridgeway's Analyst of the Year. Then external, a Regional Analytics Excellence Award. Then bigger. My retail methodology became a published case study in an industry journal. Conferences invited me to speak. Universities asked me to guest lecture. People started asking how I stayed so composed under pressure, how I managed complex projects so effectively. I always smiled and said the same thing. Practice, and learning from every situation, especially the difficult ones. I never mentioned Westfield. I never mentioned that boardroom. I didn't need to. That wasn't my story anymore. I thought that was the ending. Professional success, personal peace, a career rebuilt on solid ground instead of politics. I had moved past the humiliation and the anger. I'd proven, mostly to myself, that I was more than that quiet guy people could dismiss and forget. Then I received an email from the National Analytics Association. They were creating a new award for innovative consulting methodology, and I'd been selected as the first recipient. The ceremony would be at next year's conference in front of 3,000 industry professionals. My name would be permanently attached to excellence in the field. I sat in my apartment reading the email 3 times, and something settled deep in my chest. This wasn't just closure. This wasn't just recovery. This was elevation. I'd climbed higher than I'd ever imagined, and I'd done it by focusing on the work instead of the revenge. I never reached out to anyone from Westfield. Marcus never contacted me. Kyle didn't send a congratulatory message. Amanda and I kept in touch occasionally, but we didn't talk about the old days. That silence, that complete separation felt like its own kind of victory. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need explanations or acknowledgements or admissions of wrongdoing. My life had moved too far forward to look back for validation from people who'd never valued me anyway. Sometimes at night, I thought about that boardroom and the sound of laughter echoing off glass walls, but it felt distant now, like something that had happened to a different person in a different life, because in a real way, it had. The David who'd stood frozen at that presentation screen didn't exist anymore. I'd become someone entirely different, someone stronger, clearer, and completely unbothered by the opinions of people who'd revealed their limitations. Here's what I learned through all of it. People who laugh at you during your lowest moment aren't revealing anything about you. They're revealing their ceiling. They're showing you exactly how high they can see, and it's not very high. Marcus and Kyle and everyone in that boardroom, they were always going to stay at that level, making themselves feel big by making others feel small, taking shortcuts and blaming others when those shortcuts failed. I didn't shock them with my success. I didn't prove them wrong or make them regret what they did. Those would all require them to still be part of my world. And they weren't. I simply outgrew them. I moved into spaces they couldn't reach and built things they couldn't build. The real victory wasn't that they failed while I succeeded. It was that their failure or success stopped mattering to me at all. I found something better than revenge. I found indifference, and I built a life so fulfilling that their laughter became nothing but background noise from a place I'd left behind,